Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. Rain tapped softly against the cracked windowpane of a one-room apartment tucked behind a row of abandoned factories. The sound had long stopped bothering Kingsley Benard. In fact, he found it comforting, like the steady ticking of a clock reminding him that time was still moving forward no matter how hard life pressed against him. At 17, he already carried the posture of a man twice his age, shoulders squared, eyes observant, voice calm even when exhaustion trembled beneath it. On the small kitchen table lay the remains of 3 dismantled radios, their wires exposed like fragile veins. Kingsley worked patiently, soldering connections under the weak glow of a flickering bulb. His mother, Elena Benard, slept just a few feet away on a narrow bed separated from the rest of the room by a faded curtain. Every few minutes he glanced toward her, listening for her breathing, because the persistent cough she tried so hard to hide had been growing worse. Elena never complained. She still hummed old melodies while preparing breakfast and insisted on packing his lunch even after long night shifts cleaning hospital corridors. Kingsley understood more than she realized. He saw how she sometimes paused to steady herself against walls when she thought he wasn't looking. That quiet strength became his first definition of love. Money was always scarce, but dignity never was. When classmates mocked his worn shoes, Kingsley simply smiled and focused on the future he was determined to build. He collected discarded electronics from junkyards, repaired them, and sold them online using the public library's computers. Each sale, no matter how small, felt like a brick laid toward an invisible fortress he was constructing around the people he loved. One evening, Elena returned home later than usual. Her steps were slower, her smile thinner. Kingsley heated soup while pretending not to notice the tremor in her hands. They spoke about ordinary things, school assignments, a neighbor's noisy dog, the smell of rain, but beneath the conversation lingered a silent understanding that time was fragile. That night, Elena collapsed while reaching for a glass of water. The ambulance arrived quickly, but the sterile brightness of the hospital could not reverse what her body had been enduring for months. Kingsley sat beside her bed, gripping her hand as machines hummed steadily. She urged him not to abandon his dreams for grief. "Hardship," she whispered, her voice faint yet resolute, "is only a teacher. Learn from it, then outgrow it." When dawn broke, she was gone. The stillness that followed felt heavier than any sound. In the days after the funeral, officials suggested foster care, but Kingsley refused with startling composure. He petitioned for legal independence, presenting records of his income streams and academic excellence. The judge studied him carefully before granting the request, remarking that determination burned in the boy's eyes. That night, alone in the apartment that suddenly felt far too quiet, Kingsley made a promise aloud: no one connected to his life would ever again be left vulnerable to circumstance. It was not spoken dramatically, it was carved into his identity. Survival demanded discipline. Kingsley attended school by day and worked evenings loading delivery trucks, teaching himself advanced programming during breaks. Sleep became optional. Progress was not. Teachers noticed his brilliance, but few understood the furnace fueling it. By 19, he had developed a logistics algorithm that reduced delivery inefficiencies for small retailers. When a regional distributor adopted his system, the modest licensing fee became the first real capital he had ever known. Instead of celebrating, Kingsley reinvested every dollar, launching a startup from a cramped co-working space that smelled faintly of burnt coffee. The early months were brutal: server failures, skeptical investors, competitors twice his size, but adversity sharpened his instincts rather than discouraging him. What distinguished Kingsley was not merely intelligence, it was emotional restraint. While others chased quick wins, he built systems meant to endure. Slowly, contracts multiplied. Partnerships followed. By 26, Kingsley Benard was no longer the boy soldering wires under a dim bulb. He was the architect of a rapidly expanding tech empire known for its predictive supply chain platforms. Yet success did not inflate him. He still preferred simple meals, still kept his mother's photograph on his desk, and still believed that character revealed itself most clearly when comfort disappeared. The first time Tina Valmorn entered his orbit, the air seemed to rearrange itself. It happened at a private investor gala hosted in a glass-walled skyscraper overlooking a river that shimmered like molten silver beneath the evening lights. Kingsley attended reluctantly, wearing a tailored suit that felt foreign compared to his usual practicality. Tina, however, moved through the room with effortless grace. She possessed the kind of beauty that drew attention without appearing to demand it. Dark hair flowing over one shoulder, posture elegant, eyes sharp with curiosity. When introduced, she did not immediately speak about his wealth as others often did. Instead, she asked what problem he most wanted to solve next. The question caught him off guard. Their conversation stretched from minutes into an hour, drifting from innovation to philosophy, from childhood influences to the quiet loneliness success sometimes imposed. Tina revealed she came from a lineage of art collectors but preferred forging her own path through cultural consulting. She spoke warmly of creativity, of building environments where people felt inspired. Kingsley sensed ambition in her, but it appeared aligned with growth rather than greed. For a man who trusted slowly, her presence felt unexpectedly calming. Their relationship unfolded with deliberate tenderness. Tina introduced him to experiences he had never prioritized: gallery openings, chamber music concerts, spontaneous weekend escapes into the countryside where they walked along mist-covered trails at sunrise. Kingsley, in turn, showed her the operational heart of his company, explaining algorithms with the quiet excitement of someone still astonished by what perseverance could produce. She listened attentively, often finishing his thoughts in ways that made him feel deeply understood. When he proposed 18 months later on a secluded terrace lit by lanterns, Tina's eyes filled with tears before she even answered. Yes arrived as both a whisper and a promise. Friends remarked on how balanced they seemed, his steadiness complementing her vibrancy. Kingsley allowed himself, perhaps for the first time since his mother's passing, to imagine a future shaped not solely by responsibility but by shared joy. Within his inner circle stood Uncle Francis Giroux, the family lawyer who had guided Kingsley through early contractual complexities. Though not related by blood, Francis had been a colleague of Elena's cousin and stepped into a mentorship role when Kingsley first navigated corporate waters. Silver-haired and articulate, he projected reliability. He often reminded Kingsley that rapid success attracted silent predators and insisted on meticulous legal protections. Kingsley trusted him almost reflexively. Francis attended holidays, advised on acquisitions, and spoke with paternal warmth that softened his otherwise calculating demeanor. Few noticed the subtle intensity with which Francis studied financial structures. Fewer still saw the ambition coiled beneath his professionalism. The company expanded internationally, and with growth came a larger household staff to manage Kingsley's increasingly demanding schedule. Among the new hires was Sophie Laurent, a reserved young woman who carried herself with quiet diligence. She had relocated after her mother's chronic illness consumed the family's savings. Sophie viewed employment not merely as income but as a lifeline sustaining the person who had sacrificed everything for her upbringing. Despite her own burdens, she approached each task with care, arranging files precisely, ensuring meetings flowed seamlessly, noticing needs before they were voiced. Kingsley appreciated efficiency but rarely formed personal attachments with staff. Still, he sensed something unusually sincere in Sophie's composure. Not everyone welcomed Kingsley's ascent. At a networking summit, he met Colin Armand, a charismatic venture strategist known for bold deals and an even bolder social presence. Colin spoke quickly, laughed easily, and seemed perpetually surrounded by admirers. Tina recognized him immediately. They had crossed paths at several elite functions. Collins congratulated Kingsley with enthusiasm that bordered on theatrical, praising his foresight and hinting at future collaborations. Kingsley, though cordial, felt an inexplicable caution. There was Polish in Collins's charm, but also calculation, like a performer who never truly stepped off stage. Months drifted into a rhythm of productivity and celebration. Wedding plans progressed, guest lists swelled, and architectural renderings of their future home arrived weekly. Yet beneath the surface, faint dissonances appeared, moments so subtle they barely registered. Tina occasionally asked unusually detailed questions about asset structures, attributing her curiosity to wanting shared transparency. Francis recommended consolidating certain holdings for simplicity, drafting documents thick with legal phrasing. Collins began appearing more frequently at events Tina attended, always with plausible explanations. None of these details alone sparked alarm. Together they formed a pattern too incomplete to decipher. Then came the night that fractured certainty. Rain slicked the highway as Kingsley drove back from a late meeting, headlights stretching across wet asphalt like trembling ribbons. A truck ahead swerved unexpectedly. Instinct propelled him to adjust, but the collision struck with violent suddenness, a thunderclap of metal, the world spinning, glass scattering into darkness. When consciousness returned, it did so in fragments, antiseptic air, rhythmic beeping, distant voices merging into a blur. He tried to move but felt nothing below his waist, only a terrifying absence where sensation should have been. Doctors spoke gently yet directly about spinal trauma, about uncertainty, about patience. Tina wept at his bedside, clutching his hand as though anchoring herself against a storm. Francis handled administrative details with swift authority, reassuring everyone that Kingsley's interests were protected. Days in the rehabilitation suite passed like suspended time. Visitors arrived bearing flowers and cautious optimism. Tina decorated the room with photographs from happier moments, telling him repeatedly that love did not depend on physical strength. Kingsley wanted to believe her. Still, solitude sharpened perception. One afternoon, as a nurse adjusted equipment, Kingsley noticed a faint flicker in his left foot, so slight it might have been imagined. He said nothing. Over the next weeks, sensation returned in whispers, a tingling, a pulse, a fragile spark. Doctors described such signs as encouraging but premature. Kingsley listened, nodded, and began quietly testing his limits when no one watched. It was during a late evening, half awake, that he overheard voices drifting through the partially closed door. Tina's tone was lower than usual, stripped of its practiced warmth. Francis responded with measured calm, discussing timelines and authorizations. A third voice, Collins, joined briefly, speaking about patience and discretion. The words were incomplete, yet their implications unsettled him. Kingsley lay still, breath controlled, mind racing. If recovery continued, revealing it too soon might expose him to forces he did not yet understand. Remembering his mother's belief that adversity revealed truth, he made a decision both strategic and deeply personal. He would remain outwardly paralyzed. For 3 months, he would watch, listen, and learn who truly stood beside him when strength appeared absent. The morning sunlight filtered gently through automated blinds, casting soft geometric patterns across the polished floor of Kingsley's private rehabilitation suite. Machines hummed with steady indifference, marking time in precise electronic rhythms. Kingsley lay motionless beneath a lightweight blanket, his breathing slow, his gaze unfocused, a perfect portrait of fragile recovery. Inside, however, his awareness had sharpened into something almost surgical. Every footstep in the corridor registered. Every whisper carried weight. Every pause felt intentional. Tina entered quietly, her perfume arriving seconds before she did, floral yet sharp. She adjusted the vase beside his bed without meeting his eyes, then checked her reflection in the dark screen of a powered-off monitor. The tenderness she once displayed had begun to thin, replaced by something cooler, efficiency disguised as care. She spoke softly about wedding postponements and sympathetic messages from social circles, but her voice lacked the tremor of someone grieving a shared future. When she believed him asleep, her expression flattened completely. That was the moment Kingsley stopped mourning what they had been and began studying who she truly was. Later that afternoon, Uncle Francis arrived with a leather portfolio tucked beneath his arm, projecting his usual calm authority. He discussed restructuring certain operational powers temporarily, emphasizing how critical stability was for investor confidence. Kingsley let his eyelids remain heavy while absorbing each word. Francis's sentences were impeccably crafted, too impeccably. They avoided overt aggression yet nudged control away from him piece by piece. Tina listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that suggested prior knowledge. Their coordination was subtle but unmistakable, like musicians who had rehearsed together. When Francis mentioned a revised power of attorney draft, Kingsley felt a flicker of sensation in his calf, not physical this time, but instinctive. Something was shifting beneath the surface of his life. He resolved not merely to observe but to remember everything with exactness. That evening, Sophie entered to adjust the lighting and replace a medication tray. Unlike the others, she spoke directly to him even when she assumed he could not respond. She described the weather, the scent of approaching autumn, the quiet beauty of ordinary days. Her voice carried no performance, only human warmth. As she straightened the blanket, Her fingers paused briefly, careful not to disturb him. Kingsley noticed the faint fatigue beneath her composure, the kind belonging to someone balancing invisible burdens. When she left, he realized something unexpected. In a room increasingly populated by calculated intentions, Sophie's sincerity felt almost luminous. And for the first time since the accident, hope appeared not as a grand future but as the simple possibility that truth could still be found among strangers. Days stretched into a disciplined routine of stillness. Kingsley began testing micromovements after midnight, when staffing thinned and corridors quieted. A controlled flex of the ankle. A measured shift of the knee. Each success confirmed what his doctors cautiously suspected: neural pathways were reconnecting. Yet he concealed progress behind unwavering passivity. Meanwhile, Tina's visits shortened. She often stepped outside to take calls, her tone crisp, her laughter returning in ways it never did beside his bed. One evening, she forgot her tablet on a chair. The screen lit with a message preview from Collins: "Soon everything aligns." Kingsley memorized the words before the display dimmed again. Francis grew increasingly present in corporate matters, briefing board members with paternal gravity. Public statements framed Kingsley as courageous yet incapacitated, ensuring sympathy without inviting speculation about his eventual return. Investors responded predictably. Markets preferred continuity over uncertainty. Kingsley understood the strategy, and the quiet displacement embedded within it. He imagined his mother watching, reminding him that patience often outmaneuvered force. So he waited, letting others underestimate the man they believed permanently confined. Sophie became the steady constant threading through those uncertain weeks. One night, while organizing documents at the small desk near the window, she took a call she clearly wished to hide but could not ignore. Her voice softened as she spoke to a medical coordinator about delayed treatments for her mother. She apologized repeatedly for not being able to transfer funds yet, insisting she would find a way soon. When the call ended, she pressed her forehead briefly against the cool glass, gathering strength before returning to her tasks. Kingsley felt something shift inside him, not pity, but respect. She carried hardship without allowing it to harden her. The decision to trust her formed gradually but unmistakably. He waited for an evening when rain muffled external noise and asked her name aloud just as she turned to leave. The tray she held rattled softly as shock widened her eyes. For several seconds she simply stared, searching his face for confirmation that the voice had been real. Kingsley lifted a finger, a small movement, yet undeniable. Emotion flickered across her features: relief, confusion, fierce protectiveness. He spoke quietly, explaining that sensation had returned earlier than anyone realized and that he intended to keep it hidden. Sophie listened without interruption, absorbing the magnitude of what he was risking. Their alliance began not with dramatic vows but with mutual understanding. Sophie agreed to act as his observer, documenting irregularities with meticulous care. She moved through the household unnoticed, gathering fragments, copied schedules, photographed signatures, inconsistencies in financial drafts. Kingsley, meanwhile, maintained his flawless performance. Together they built a silent architecture of truth. Trust deepened quickly, forged not by convenience but by shared purpose. For Sophie, protecting him felt less like obligation and more like defending fairness itself. As weeks passed, patterns sharpened into evidence. Collins visited more frequently when Tina assumed Kingsley was sedated. Their conversations drifted toward future travel, shared investments, and the freedom awaiting once legal transitions finalized. One afternoon, laughter echoed from the garden terrace, intimate, unguarded. Through a strategically angled mirror Sophie had positioned earlier, Kingsley saw them seated closer than casual acquaintances would be. He felt no theatrical heartbreak, only a cool clarity settling into place. Love, he realized, should never require surveillance to verify its existence. Yet not every revelation cut. Some healed. During quieter hours, Sophie spoke about the coastal town where she grew up, how her mother taught literature, how evenings smelled faintly of salt and jasmine, how resilience often looked ordinary from the outside. Kingsley found himself sharing pieces of his own journey: the soldered radios, his mother's laughter, the promise that had driven him forward. These exchanges carried no pretense. In them, he rediscovered the version of himself untouched by suspicion. Winter approached with a subdued elegance, and Tina announced plans for a grand recovery celebration to reassure stakeholders. Invitations circulated quickly through elite circles. Francis endorsed the idea as strategically brilliant, a public affirmation of continuity. Kingsley accepted the news with placid gratitude, though internally he recognized the event's deeper objective, formalizing authority while he appeared incapable of objection. Sophie intensified her documentation, ensuring every thread connected cleanly. The night before the gathering, Kingsley stood unaided for the first time beside the bed, muscles trembling yet obedient. Sophie watched, astonishment shining through restrained composure. He took a tentative step, then another. Each movement felt less like reclaiming motion and more like reclaiming authorship over his life. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "truth walks in with us." The ballroom glowed beneath cascading chandeliers, conversations blending into a low symphony of refinement. Tina moved gracefully among guests, projecting devotion. Francis prepared documents in a private lounge, ready for ceremonial acknowledgement. When Kingsley was wheeled inside, sympathetic smiles followed. He allowed the moment to stretch, the illusion at its most convincing. Then, as Tina began outlining her new legal role, Kingsley placed his hands on the armrests and rose. Silence fell with almost physical force. He stepped forward, steady, unmistakably whole. Gasps rippled outward. Tina's composure fractured. Francis's portfolio slipped slightly in his grip. Kingsley spoke calmly, presenting the timeline of his recovery and the investigation conducted quietly alongside medical supervision and legal authorities already present nearby. Sophie provided the final confirmations, her voice clear despite the charged air. Consequences unfolded swiftly, not as spectacle but as inevitability. Conversations hushed, alliances dissolved, and the architecture of deception collapsed under documented truth. Kingsley felt neither triumph nor bitterness, only release, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. Weeks later, spring sunlight warmed the terrace of a smaller, quieter home. Corporate leadership had stabilized under transparent governance, and life regained a rhythm no longer shaped by pretense. Sophie's mother received the care she needed, recovering strength day by day. One afternoon, as they watched the horizon soften into gold, Kingsley reflected on the strange arithmetic of hardship, how loss had once propelled him toward ambition, and how betrayal had guided him back toward authenticity. He understood now that wealth measured in numbers could never equal the security found in genuine companionship. Turning to Sophie, he recognized not the rescuer of a vulnerable man but the partner who had stood steady when illusions fell away. The future before them felt unwritten yet promising, a beginning defined not by suspicion, but by the quiet certainty that truth, once chosen, had the power to endure. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.